Good morning and welcome to November's payroll update webinar. I'll just need to let you know first of all that I will take questions at the end of the session, and you can either put your questions in the chat box or you can use Teams to raise your hands and ask your questions out loud. But I do just need you to know that I am recording that session, so bear that one in mind before you ask your questions. I'm Helen Hargreaves and I'm Head of Payroll Policy here at MBKB Training. Well, what a few weeks it's been since the last payroll update, but I think that the music's finally stopped. Things are going to stand still long enough for me to set out where we are now. And actually, with yet another new Prime Minister and Chancellor, most, though not all, of the announcements that former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng made in his fiscal statement back in September have been overturned, and many things are back where they were at the beginning of summer. So there's actually a lot less in this update than we might feared, and with policy statement following policy statement coming out ahead of time, we actually knew most things before the final announcements were made in last week's autumn statement, which was accompanied by economic forecasts which have been supplied by the Office for Budget Responsibility, something else that we've been waiting for. One of the principles adopted by the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is that the freezing of existing rates and thresholds, which is likely to make all of us financially worse off for some time to come, looking on the bright side, should at least give payroll teams more certainty over the next 6 years. Wouldn't that be nice? But I'm not holding my breath that that is actually what will happen. So let's look at today's agenda. It's quite a short agenda today, you'll see. And unusually, following an autumn statement, I think that this payroll update is going to be shorter than normal. So to start with, we're going to look at, after all the ins and outs and hokey cokey over the summer, where are we now? Then we'll have a look at national minimum wage. Then we'll look at the advisory fuel rates, and something that wasn't part of the autumn statement, but it's an announcement being made recently by HMRC. We'll have a look at what they're wanting to do with salary advances. And then, like I said, we'll do questions at the end. So where are we now? Well, doubling back on ourselves is where we are right now. And it's for this reason that I've waited until now to send out the newsletter update that came out earlier in the week and to deliver this webinar, because up until now, nothing was staying still long enough for me to let you know about it. It would have been out of date before I got a chance to speak, but I think that the music stopped. We've got a period where it feels like everything is now going to stay the same for a while. So now's the right time to explain where we are. So income tax. The following are frozen at 21-22 value. So they're frozen until 2028. That's 6 years that everything's going to be staying the same, apparently. So the personal allowance is going to stay at £12,570 for tax purposes, and that's staying like that until April 2028. The rates at which income tax is paid in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will also remain as follows until April 2028, and that is 20% basic rate tax, 40% higher rate and 45% additional rate. Remember, that only applies in England, Wales and Northern Ireland because Scotland sets its own rates and thresholds. The threshold at which additional rate becomes payable will be lowered from £150,000 to £125,140 from April 2023. Now, you'll notice on the slide that I said that may vary in Scotland, and that's because there are different rules depending on what kind of income it is. So the additional rate for non-savings and non-dividend income, so in our case, the earnings through pay as you earn, that will apply to England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and Scotland will set their own additional rate threshold for earnings. But the additional rate threshold for savings and dividend income will apply across the whole of the UK and will also include Scotland in that. The married couples and blind persons allowance will increase by 10.1%, which is in line with inflation, or it was in line with inflation at the time. And that means that the married couples allowance will be between £4,010 and £10,375 in tax year 23-24, and the blind person's allowance will rise to £2,870. These aren't rates that we know at the moment are being frozen. These are just the rates for the next tax year, so 23-24 for those two, married couples and blind persons. With most of the tax and national insurance thresholds frozen, you might be wondering why you keep hearing the phrase stealth tax. The stealth tax means that as wages grow and people earn more, the tax collected by the Treasury will also grow, and workers might find themselves tipping into the next tax bracket because the threshold isn't rising in line with wages. So if we look at national insurance thresholds now, these are frozen until 2028. The primary threshold is the amount at which employees begin to pay national insurance, and unusually it was amended partway through the tax year, so it was changed in July. The primary threshold was reduced in July, and that now the rates on screen is what the national insurance thresholds will be frozen at until April 2028. Jeremy Hunt in the autumn statement didn't overturn Kwasi Kwarteng's reduction to Class 1 national insurance rates that came into effect on the 6th of November. So we know that at the beginning of this tax year, we had higher national insurance rates to pave the way for the health and social care levy that was going to come in properly in April 2023. So when Kwasi Kwarteng became Chancellor, he reversed that and brought the national insurance rates back down to the levels that they had been last year. So from the 6th of November, you can see the rates on screen there for someone who pays category A, which is the majority of people in the country. The national insurance for employees will be 12% and for employers will be 13.8%. And when Jeremy Hunt became Chancellor, he didn't change this. He's left these rates as they are now, and we know that we are not going to have the health and social care levy coming in next year. What we don't know is whether these rates are going to remain frozen or not. That's not been announced. Bearing in mind that these rates, the 12% and the 13.8%, have been in force for years and years and years. So it would be a bold move to change them again, but obviously we know that that has already happened once this year, so it could happen again. For now, any change to the rates is on the back burner. I wouldn't say it's gone away for good, but we are where we are for the rest of the year, and it's looking likely for next year as well. If we look now at where national insurance is going to be slightly different, as you know, Class 1 national insurance is generally collected and worked out on a pay period basis for both employees and employers. But there are other forms of national insurance that are calculated on an annual basis. So we have Class 1A national insurance on benefits in kind, Class 1B on pay-as-you-earn settlement agreements, and we also have Class 1A on termination period payments and sporting testimonials. So let's break that down then. Class 1A and Class 1B national insurance is paid annually. This rate will change, but the rate payable will depend on the reason it is paid. So if employees are in receipt of a termination or sporting testimonial payment, employees don't pay national insurance, their employers pay Class 1A in real time. So they pay Class 1A national insurance at the time that payment is made. And in these instances, the rate that is payable now, because of course we've had changes over the year, but the rate that is payable will be the rate in force at the time. So if a payment had been made before the 6th of November, it would have been paid at 15.05%, and if it's paid after the 6th of November, it will be 13.8%. But Class 1A national insurance is also paid by employers in respect of expenses and benefits that have been provided to employees during the tax year 22-23. So to allow for that rate change, HMRC have averaged it out really. So they've averaged out what the rate would be across the whole of the year, allowing for those changes. And that means that there will be a blended rate, is the official term, of 14.53%. So any Class 1B or in respect of pay-as-you-earn settlement agreements and Class 1A on expenses and benefits payable next year will be paid at the rate of 14.53%. There's also some differences for directors' national insurance, because there are two ways of calculating directors' national insurance. It can either be calculated on an annual basis, or it can be calculated on an alternative basis. So those who use the annual method of calculation will use the blended rate, that 14.53% for employers at the end of the year, and a blended rate for the directors themselves, that will be 12.73%. That's for directors who are on national insurance category A. For those who use the alternative method, where directors' national insurance is worked out each time they're paid, then the rates that were in force at the time the payment is made is the rate that should be used. So it would either be 15.05% if it was up till the 5th of November, and 13.8% if it was after the 6th of November. And for the directors themselves, it would either be 12% or 13.25%, depending on the time that the payment had been made. We were also asked to put a message on pay slips regarding the increase to national insurance up until November of 1.25%. And that message was to tell everybody that they were paying more national insurance to pay for health and social care. Because the rates have come back down, you need to make sure that that pay slip is no longer shown on the pay slip. And you do need to make sure that your payroll software has correctly actioned the reduction back down of national insurance rates. I'm conscious that we're round about November payday now, so you do need to make sure that your software is applying the correct rates. And if there hasn't been enough time to get the software changed, because Kwasi Kwarteng announced at the end of September that the national insurance rate would come down from the 6th of November. It was only 6 weeks. That was a very, very short turnaround for payroll software and for payroll departments to get those changes in place. So if you haven't been able to apply the right rates, then you might have to make a refund to the employee. The official instruction is that you should receive the employees should receive that benefit retrospectively, and it's down to the employers to make refunds in as the first part of call. So we also found out in the autumn statement what the Chancellor's plans are for company cars. The company car tax rates have now been set until April 2028. As it stands at the moment, fully electric vehicles rates of 2% will be frozen until April 2025. But from April 2025, we'll start to see them increasing. So they'll be increasing by 1% year on year for the 3 years from 2025. So that means in 25-26 they'll go up to 3%, it'll be 4% in 2026-27 and 5% in 27-28. So the maximum appropriate rate will then be 5% for electric cars and 21% for ultra low emission vehicles. At the moment, electric cars are also exempt from car tax. They don't need to pay car tax, otherwise known as vehicle excise duty. But that will also change from April 2025. So the vehicle excise duty for cars will be £10 in the first year and £165 from the second year of registration onwards. And the vehicle excise duty for electric vans will be £290. Why has this changed? Why are electric cars suddenly not being given these tax breaks? Well, that's because the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that by 2025, a half of all new vehicles are going to be electric, which means that the current government tax breaks that encourage us to buy electric vehicles, that is going to have to come to an end, because otherwise the government is going to be losing a big source of income that it gets from taxing our petrol and diesel cars. So it'll need to start taxing electric cars instead. If we look at other types of cars, the rates for all other vehicles, vans, will increase by 1% in 25-26, up to a maximum of 37%, and will then be fixed for the next 2 years after that. And from next April 23, the car and van fuel benefit charges and van benefit charges will be increased in line with inflation. So what other changes did we hear about in the autumn statement that just affect the employer and the employment taxes generally? Well, we know that the employment allowance is going to remain fixed at £5,000, so that should help to mitigate things for small employers. And Kwasi Kwarteng's plans to reverse the off-payroll working rules have themselves been reversed. So that means that medium and large-sized organisations in the private and voluntary sector and all public sector organisations will remain responsible for determining the employment status and paying the correct amount of tax and national insurance for any workers who provide their services via an intermediary. And also in the September fiscal statement, Kwasi Kwarteng announced plans for investment zones, and these were designed to speed up economic growth by streamlining planning rules, giving tax breaks, and largely promoting development. And although Jeremy Hunt hasn't scrapped the plans altogether, what he has said is that existing investment zone proposals will be dropped and the policy will be refocused to benefit research clusters, whatever that means. So let's look now at national minimum wage. The government has accepted the proposals from the Low Pay Commission on the national minimum wage rates from April 2023. Once again, the 21 to 22-year-old rate's been increased by a larger percentage than other rates, and that does seem to be in preparation for the national living wage going to be applying to all workers over the age of 21, and the aim is that that will happen from April 24. So they're working on closing that gap all the time. It's a bit frustrating for me. I'm about to get on my soapbox when the government yet again talks about how it's increasing wages for the UK's workforce by increasing minimum wage rates, because it's as if the government is paying for these increased wages itself. And what we have to remember is that many employers are also facing big financial squeezes, and this increase of around 10% could be difficult for some to achieve. Workers across the nation are obviously going to welcome that announcement if they are being paid at national minimum wage, but employers are going to have to really look at their financial structure and make sure that they can factor in these increased staffing costs. But make sure that you don't confuse the national living wage with the real living wage rates. So the national minimum wage rates, whether that's national living wage or national minimum wage or apprentice rate, these are all mandatory. Employers have to pay at least these amounts per hour. The the real living wage is voluntary, and it's independently set by the Living Wage Foundation. So normally the real living wage, the rate is announced about this time. It's normally around about November. But this year, the Living Wage Foundation announced it early. They were so concerned about the impact of the cost of living that they announced these changes and the increases in September. Employers sign up to the Living Wage Foundation, and if they sign up, then they commit to pay these rates, which are higher than the mandatory levels. And if employers sign up to pay the real living wage, then they have 6 months from the announcement in which to implement them. So these ones came into effect in September, which means that they need to be enforced by March. And the real living wage has increased by 10.1%. You don't have different age bands for the real living wage. You just have, everybody has the same bills, the same rent, the same electric and everything. So there is no age band here. Just depends on where you live. So there is a London living wage because costs do tend to be high there. So that's £11.95. And there's a UK living wage, which is £10.90 for everybody who's outside London. Advisory fuel rates. Now, perhaps indicative that the cost of oil at the moment has stabilised a bit. The rates have not increased from September. So for petrol, LPG and diesel, there are no changes to the advisory fuel rates. But what has changed is that from the 1st of December, there is an increase for fully electric cars. That's gone from 5 pence a mile to 8 pence a mile. And this now is going to be reviewed quarterly, just exactly the same as the advisory fuel rates are for petrol, LPG and diesel. So I've added it to the chart there. So now whenever we look at any increases to advisory fuel rates, it will also include those for fully electric vehicles. So if we look now at salary advances. Salary advances are arrangements between an employer and an employee where employees can get access to some of their earnings before the normal payday. Under current legislation, these advance payments should be treated as a payment on account of earnings, which means then that employers need to submit an extra FPS to record the advance payment, and then of course a usual FPS at the time of the normal payday when people get the rest of the pay. That's the official process, but a lot of the time that doesn't happen because employers might call it a loan, so they don't need to use an FPS there. And HMRC have recognised that this requirement to submit additional FPSs for at the time of the advance as well as at the normal payday, it causes an administrative burden. It causes a burden on employers, but it also causes a burden on HMRC because they've got to process it as well. And it can also affect universal credits. So what HMRC has done is said, okay, then let's simplify things. I accept that salary advances do happen, and we know that not all employers are submitting additional FPSs. So let's say, well, you don't have to. So what they're doing is changing secondary legislation so that a salary advance can be reported on or before the employee's contractual payday. So essentially, payment of salary only needs to be reported once, because how things work at the moment is that if someone gets an advance, then yes, they will either include them on an FPS and then include the remainder on the contractual FPS at the end of the month, or someone would process the FPS at the end of the month for the gross pay and then deduct the amount of the advance from the net pay. And that is the position that HMRC has said, let's just do that from now on. So anyone that is currently doing that now can carry on doing that, and the legislation will change to make that a legitimate process. HMRC are going to give more guidance in the employer bulletin, which is due to come out any time now. So I'm looking to see if we have any questions. We have a question, first of all, on off-payroll working, about what exactly that position means. Are any processes having to change? The answer to that is no. The position that we've got now is what is now going to continue. When Kwasi Kwarteng was Chancellor, he said that he was going to change the process. Jeremy Hunt has overturned that, so the practice that we have now is what continues and is going to stay on. for the foreseeable future, which means that the responsibility for determining the employment status of anybody who provides their services through an intermediary or a personal service company, it's the organisation which is receiving those services that has to go through the employment status checks, go through that process, and if the individual falls within the rules, then that organisation is responsible for deducting tax and national insurance before paying the remainder of the invoice. So exactly as we are now, just carry on doing what you're doing, unless of course you've only just had to get involved with off payroll working and you're not sure about it, well then get in touch with us. The contact information is on that slide, because we do have off payroll working training courses, and we can make sure that you get all the information that you need. So get in touch if that applies to you. I've also had a question in the chat box about salary advances. Like I'd said, what you will need to do moving forward is, if somebody has a salary advance, you won't need to do an FPS at the time that they get the advance, as well as on the contractual payday. All you'll need to do is an FPS on or before the contractual payday, showing the gross pay, and you only need to report it once. You don't need to report it twice. But look out for more information in November's employer bulletin from HMRC, and that will explain exactly what you need to do. If we don't have any more questions, I will bring the session to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this morning, and I wish you a great rest of your Friday and hope you have a fabulous weekend. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.